For 12,000 years, the Thorisci Empire had ruled the galaxy. Not ruled with diplomacy. Not ruled with alliances. They ruled with absolute, unquestioned dominance. Their fleets numbered in the tens of thousands. Their warships, Void Reapers, were so massive they dwarfed moons. Entire civilizations surrendered at the mere mention of their name. There had been rebellions. There had been coalitions. There had even been species that believed they could challenge them. Every single one of them had been erased. And in all that time, the Thorisci had never once been afraid. Not of war. Not of extinction. Not of anything. Fear was a concept reserved for lesser species. So when a junior intelligence analyst walked into the Imperial War Chamber and reported unusual activity in a distant, insignificant star system, no one paid attention. Because the system she was talking about belonged to a species that had already been classified, documented, and dismissed. Humans. A soft-bodied, short-lived species from an unremarkable yellow star. Primitive. Limited. Irrelevant. They had no faster-than-light travel when first discovered. No advanced weaponry. No strategic value. The Thorisci didn't conquer them. They didn't enslave them. They didn't even consider them worth the effort. They simply labeled them. Fauna. Animals. Creatures to observe. To catalogue. To ignore. So when the analyst spoke, they are building something. There was no tension in the room. No urgency. Only mild curiosity. And then, amusement. The High Sovereign barely opened her eyes as she listened. What are they building? She asked, her voice carrying more boredom than concern. The analyst hesitated. We don't know. That earned a few quiet clicks of laughter from the council. Not because it was funny, but because it was insignificant. Then it is nothing, one of the admirals said. Let them play with their toys. And just like that, the matter was dismissed. The report forgotten. The warning ignored. Because in a galaxy ruled for 12,000 years by an empire that had never known fear, the idea that something insignificant could become dangerous was not just unlikely, it was impossible. At least, that's what they believed. The Thorisci did not hate humanity. Hatred required recognition. And humanity had never been important enough to be hated. They were observed. Studied the way one studies wildlife. 200 years earlier, when the Thorisci first discovered Earth, they had expected very little, and humanity had not disappointed them. No faster-than-light travel. No interstellar colonies. No unified planetary government. Just a fractured species on a single world, still struggling with itself. The classification was immediate. Class 0 primitive. In simpler terms, irrelevant. Human diplomats had tried. They had reached out across the void with messages of cooperation, curiosity, hope. They had asked for knowledge. For access. For a chance to join the greater galaxy. The Thorisci response had been polite. Cold. And final. Request denied. Species does not meet minimum intelligence threshold. That message had been sent to every human delegation. Every time. No variation. No reconsideration. Just rejection. And then came the surveys. Thorisci research teams arrived on Earth, not as allies, but as observers. They walked through human cities like tourists in a zoo. They recorded behavior. Collected samples. Documented culture with detached curiosity. Humans weren't treated as equals. They weren't even treated as a developing civilization. They were categorized. Measured. Filed away. Individuals photographed and labeled. Habitats recorded. Behavior patterns analyzed. Entire databases were filled with footage of human life, uploaded under Galactic Nature Archives. One entry read, bipedal fauna. Moderate intelligence. Minimal strategic value. That was humanity. Not a threat. Not a partner. Just another species in the background of a very large universe. And the worst part? The Thorisci forgot about them. Completely. No monitoring. No oversight. No continued study. Because in their eyes, humanity had already been understood. Already been judged. Already been dismissed. Back in the Imperial War Chamber, when the analyst named Kessa tried to explain the strange readings again, she could feel that same dismissal hanging in the air. The council didn't need evidence. They had already decided. Still, she tried. The object is too large to be a standard orbital structure, she said carefully. Its mass readings are wrong, one of the counselors interrupted. They are inconsistent, she corrected, trying to keep her voice steady. There is heavy interference, but even with error margins. They are building junk, another voice said. More quiet amusement. More indifference. Kessa stopped speaking. Because she understood something in that moment. This wasn't about data. It wasn't about truth. It was about belief. And the Thorisai believed, with absolute certainty, that humans did not matter. So no matter what the census said, no matter how strange the readings became, no matter how large the object actually was, they would never take it seriously. Because doing so would mean admitting something unthinkable. That they had been wrong. Kessa returned to her station in silence. But she didn't forget the readings. She didn't dismiss the anomaly. She didn't laugh. She stared at the data again. And again. And again. The numbers didn't change. They didn't make sense. And that was exactly what made them terrifying. Because if the data was even partially correct, then somewhere, in the outer darkness of the human star system, something was being built. Something far too large. Far too complex. Far too hidden. And for the first time in her life, Kessa felt something the Thorisai Empire had not experienced in 12,000 years. Not certainty. Not superiority. But doubt. Far from the halls of the Thorisai Empire. Far from the arrogance and the laughter. On a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star, humanity had already made its decision. It hadn't happened in a single room. There was no grand announcement. No speech that echoed through history. It happened quietly. Slowly. And then, all at once. 200 years earlier, humanity had looked up at the stars with hope. They believed they were not alone. They believed the galaxy would welcome them. They were wrong. Every message they sent was rejected. Every request denied. Every attempt at contact met with polite indifference. At first, there was confusion. Then disappointment. Then anger. But none of those emotions lasted. Because something colder replaced them. The turning point wasn't a war. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't destruction. It was something much smaller. Much quieter. A moment that barely registered in the vast scale of the galaxy. But changed everything for humanity. A Thorisai survey team arrived on Earth. They didn't announce themselves as equals. They didn't seek permission. They simply observed. Recorded. Catalogued. Like scientists studying wildlife. Families were watched from a distance. Children were recorded playing in parks. Cities were mapped like ecosystems. And somewhere in a database, an image was uploaded. A human woman. Standing in a field. Unaware she was being studied. Unaware she was being labeled. Her entry read. Bipedal fauna. Minimal tool use. No strategic value. She had a name. A life. A history. None of it mattered. Decades later, that file still existed. And one man was looking at it. Admiral Kale Morrow stood on a balcony overlooking the ocean as the sun dipped below the horizon. He was not an impressive figure. Not physically. Not by alien standards. Aging. Tired. Human. But behind his eyes, there was something else. Something the Thorisai had never bothered to understand. He held a datapad in his hand. And on it, that image. That classification. That mistake. His great-great-grandmother. Reduced to a line in a database. Filed under fauna. Morrow didn't feel anger. Not anymore. That had passed long ago. What he felt was something far more dangerous. Clarity. They never saw us, he said quietly. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the wind. To the ocean. To history itself. They looked, but they never saw. That was the moment. Not the first moment. But the one that mattered. Because by then, humanity had already begun to change. There were no riots. No dramatic declarations. No revenge. Instead, there was silence. Cooperation. Focus. Nations that had spent centuries divided began to share information. Scientists who had competed began to collaborate. Resources were redirected. Priorities shifted. And a single idea began to spread. Not through governments. Not through orders. But through people. Never again. Never again would they ask for permission to exist. Never again would they be ignored. Never again would they be seen as something less than what they were. The project didn't start with a name. It didn't need one. Because everyone already understood its purpose. It was not about revenge. It was not about conquest. It was about something much simpler. Something absolute. To be seen. For the first time in human history, the entire species moved in the same direction. Not loudly. Not visibly. But relentlessly. They didn't try to copy alien technology. They couldn't. They didn't have access. So they did something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten how to do. They innovated. They questioned assumptions that had gone unchallenged for thousands of years. They explored ideas that others considered impossible. Because unlike the Thorisci, humanity had never had the luxury of believing something was good enough. Years passed. Then decades. Then generations. People lived and died working on something they would never see completed. Children grew up hearing about a future they were helping to build. A future where humanity would no longer be ignored. And somewhere, far beyond Pluto, hidden in the cold darkness of the outer system, that future began to take shape. Back on Earth, Morrow closed the file. The image disappeared. But the meaning remained. He opened a secure channel. His voice was calm. Steady. Certain. Status report. A pause. Then a reply. Emotion barely contained. Admiral, all systems are operational. A breath. A crack in the voice. She's ready. Morrow closed his eyes for a moment. Not in relief. Not in pride. But in acknowledgement. 150 years. 3 generations. Countless lives. All leading to this. When he opened his eyes again, there was no hesitation. Show me. The image appeared slowly. At first, Admiral Morrow didn't understand what he was looking at. The scale was wrong. Completely wrong. A holographic projection flickered above his datapad, fed directly from the construction site deep in the outer system. There were stars in the background. Distant. Cold. Unmoving. And in front of them, something that should not have existed. Zoom out, Morrow said quietly. The image pulled back. And kept pulling back. And kept pulling back. The object didn't get smaller. The frame just struggled to contain it. Construction scaffolding stretched for thousands of kilometers, forming a skeletal cage around something vast and unfinished. Drones, thousands of them, moved across its surface like sparks drifting through the dark. Each one insignificant. Each one part of something enormous. Zoom out further. The system hesitated for a fraction of a second. As if even the software couldn't fully process what it was being asked to display. Then it complied. And that's when it became clear. It wasn't a station. It wasn't a platform. It wasn't even comparable to anything the rest of the galaxy had ever built. It was a ship. Morrow's eyes narrowed slightly. Not in disbelief. In recognition. Because this was exactly what they had been building toward. The hull stretched across the void like a continent of metal and shadow. Plates the size of cities were laid together with seamless precision. Massive structures lined its surface. Weapon arrays, engine cores, and systems that defied conventional classification. Its engines alone could have housed entire fleets. Its spine was lined with installations that looked less like weapons, and more like a horizon of destruction. Dimensions? Morrow asked. A brief pause. Then. Length, 3,200 kilometers. Silence. Not because it was surprising, but because saying it out loud made it real. This was not a warship. This was something else entirely. Status. All systems green, the engineer replied. Reactor core stable. Structural integrity at 100%. Weapon systems calibrated and standing by. A breath. Then. Admiral. A hesitation. A human moment. She's fully operational. Morrow stared at the projection. For a long time. 150 years. Every sacrifice. Every hidden effort. Every life spent working toward something most would never see. And now, it existed. What's her designation? He asked. The answer came immediately. United Earth Ship. Leviathan. The name settled into the silence. Heavy. Appropriate. Not subtle. Not symbolic. Accurate. Because this was not a vessel built to explore. Not built to negotiate. Not built to coexist. It was built for one purpose. To ensure that humanity would never be ignored again. Morrow exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not pride. Just acceptance. Prepare activation sequence, he said. Across the Leviathan, systems began to awaken. Not with noise. Not with spectacle. But with quiet, controlled power. Reactor cores pulsed to life, channeling energy through systems that had been designed beyond the limits of known physics. Internal structures shifted as dormant mechanisms aligned. Weapon arrays adjusted their positions, calibrating with precision that bordered on perfection. And deep within the core of the ship, something far more dangerous came online. Not a weapon. Not yet. A system. A network. A capability that the rest of the galaxy had never even imagined. Because the Leviathan was not just a ship. It was a factory. A system designed to build more of itself. To create fleets. To manufacture power. To scale beyond anything a static empire could ever hope to match. Morrow didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply watched. Bring her out, he said. Far beyond Neptune. Hidden behind layers of interference fields and gravitational distortion. The Leviathan began to move. Slowly. Deliberately. Not because it needed to. But because something this large did not rush. It emerged from the darkness like a creature rising from an ocean no one knew existed. And for the first time, anyone outside of humanity was about to see it. Back on Thoris Prime, Kessa's console lit up. An alert. Priority override. A deep space probe, one of the few still monitoring the human system, had transmitted a final scan before going offline. Kessa opened the data. She stared at it. Her mind trying to process the numbers. She checked it again. Then again. Then again. Each time hoping for a different result. Each time getting the same one. Her body reacted before her mind did. She stood up so fast her chair collapsed behind her. The color drained from her shell. No. Her voice barely formed the word. That's not possible. Because if the data was correct, even partially correct, then the Thorisai Empire had made a mistake. A catastrophic one. Kessa didn't hesitate this time. She opened an emergency channel directly to the Imperial War Council. Her hands were shaking. Her voice, barely controlled. High Sovereign. A pause. A breath. There is something in the human system. Another pause. It is not a station. Silence. Then. It is a ship. And after a moment, a whisper that carried something the Thorisai had not felt in 12,000 years. It is bigger than anything we have ever built. The Imperial War Chamber had not been silent in centuries. Not during war briefings. Not during rebellions. Not even during the fall of entire civilizations. There was always discussion. Always confidence. Always certainty. But now, there was silence. Kessa stood at the edge of the chamber, where junior analysts were expected to remain unseen and unheard. Above the council table, her data hovered in fractured holographic layers, broken scans, distorted readings, incomplete measurements. It wasn't clean. It wasn't perfect. But it was enough. It's corrupted, one of the counselors said quickly. Not calmly. Not confidently. Quickly. Our probe was destroyed before completing the scan. These readings are unreliable. Kessa didn't move. Didn't look away. Even with a 40% margin of error, she said carefully, the object is still over 2,000 kilometers in length. That number settled into the room like a weight. Another counselor waved a limb dismissively. Impossible. Yes, Kessa replied. A pause. But it is still there. This time? No one laughed. At the center of the chamber, Grand Admiral Cyrus had not spoken. Not once. He sat still, his gaze fixed on the projection. He had commanded fleets that burned entire worlds. He had crushed rebellions before they could take their first breath. He did not believe in impossibilities. He believed in mistakes. And this? Felt like one. We cannot ignore this, he said at last. His voice was quiet. Controlled. And that made it worse. The chamber shifted. Attention turned. Because when someone like Cyrus spoke carefully, it meant something had already gone wrong. If the humans have constructed a vessel of this scale, he continued, then they have capabilities we did not account for. Zelvathra leaned forward on her throne. For the first time since the meeting began. She was no longer bored. She was irritated. Not by the humans. By the situation. A Class 0 species is not supposed to surprise us, she said coldly. It is embarrassing. The word echoed through the chamber. Not fear. Not concern. Embarrassment. It is like discovering that insects have built a weapon, she continued. Unpleasant. Unexpected. But not a threat. Cyrus didn't respond immediately. He chose his words carefully. Insects do not build structures of this magnitude. That was enough. The decision was made. Not out of fear. Not out of urgency. Out of pride. We will send an inspection fleet, Zelvathra declared. Her voice returned to its usual authority. Unshaken. Absolute. 300 Void Reapers. A ripple moved through the chamber. Not alarm. Approval. That is unnecessary, one counselor said. If this is truly nothing, a smaller force. It is not about necessity, Zelvathra interrupted. It is about clarity. Her gaze hardened. They will enter the human system. They will demand access. They will inspect whatever has been built. A pause. And if the humans resist? Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. They will be removed. Silence followed. Heavy. Final. This is not war, she added. A faint flicker of disdain. This is pest control. The council nodded. The decision recorded. The operation approved. Only two beings in the chamber did not feel reassured. Kessa. And Cyrus. Kessa because she had seen the numbers. Because she knew something didn't add up. Because the scale of what she had witnessed did not match the confidence in the room. And Cyrus. Because he had spent a lifetime learning one simple truth. The universe does not care what you believe is impossible. 10 days later. The inspection fleet arrived. 300 Void Reapers dropped out of warp at the edge of the human star system. Each one a monument to Thorisci power. Each one capable of destroying a planet. Together. They formed a wall of force that had ended wars before they began. On the bridge of the flagship, Cyrus stood with his hands behind his back. His expression unreadable. His mind, calculating. Begin standard subjugation protocol, he ordered. The message was transmitted across all frequencies. Cold. Direct. Absolute. Unidentified human authorities. You will allow full inspection of your system immediately. All unauthorized military structures will be surrendered. Failure to comply will result in the destruction of your orbital infrastructure. Cyrus waited. Every species reacted the same way. Shock. Fear. Then submission. He expected a response within minutes. Perhaps even seconds. But the response did not come from Earth. It came from the darkness. A disturbance rippled through space. Subtle at first. Then undeniable. Sensors began to scream. Gravitational anomaly detected. Energy readings spiking. Source, unknown. Cyrus turned slowly. His eyes narrowing. Located. The display shifted. Focused. Tracked. And then. It appeared. Not suddenly. Not violently. But inevitably. Something massive began to move from behind Neptune. A glow followed it. Bright. Growing. Until it rivaled the light of the system's star. The sensors struggled. The computers failed to classify it. Because what they were seeing did not fit into any category they understood. Cyrus took a single step forward. His voice quieter than it had ever been. What is that? No one answered. Because for the first time in 12,000 years, the Thorisci Empire was not looking at something it understood. It was looking at something beyond it. It came out of the darkness, slowly. Not because it needed to. But because something that large did not rush. At first, it was only a shadow. A distortion against the stars behind Neptune. Then the light grew stronger, an unnatural glow that bent around its edges, as if space itself was struggling to contain it. Magnify, Cyrus ordered. The display zoomed in. And then. It stopped. Not because the system had reached its limit. Because it couldn't go any further without losing context. The object didn't fit. It was too large. Too dense. Too wrong. The Leviathan emerged fully into view. 3,200 kilometers of engineered mass slid into open space like a continent drifting free from reality. Its hull absorbed light instead of reflecting it, turning the ship into something less like metal. And more like a void. Weapon arrays stretched across its surface in endless rows, each one larger than a Void Reaper. Engines the size of moons burned with contained stellar energy, their output warping the surrounding vacuum. Structural lines ran along its body like the ridges of something alive. Not a machine. A presence. The bridge of the flagship went silent. No orders. No movement. 300 warships, veterans of countless campaigns, hovered in formation. Doing nothing. Because for the first time in their existence, they did not know what to do. Classification. Cyrus asked. The tactical system responded instantly. Then paused. Then tried again. Error. A flicker. Re-attempting classification. Another pause. Longer this time. Unknown object. Parameters exceed database limits. The officer at the console swallowed hard. Sir, it's not recognizing it as a ship. Cyrus didn't take his eyes off the display. That is because it isn't, he said quietly. And yet, everything about it said otherwise. A single structure. Moving under its own power. Armored. Alive with energy signatures. It was a ship. Just not one the galaxy was prepared to understand. Mass reading? Cyrus asked. The officer hesitated. Sir, the mass, it's generating its own gravitational field. That shouldn't have been possible. Not at this scale. Not for a mobile object. But the data didn't change. It is bending space around it, the officer continued, voice tight. Like a planetary body. Cyrus exhaled slowly. Controlled. Measured. And for the first time in his long career, he felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not yet. But the absence of certainty. Around him, the fleet remained frozen. 300 Void Reapers. Each one capable of ending civilizations. Each one crewed by beings who had never hesitated in battle. Now, they hesitated. Because instinct had finally caught up with reality. This was not an enemy they understood. This was something else. And then, the Leviathan spoke. The transmission cut across every frequency simultaneously. Clear. Calm. Unhurried. Automatically translated into every known language. This is Admiral Cale Morrow of the United Earthship Leviathan. No distortion. No aggression. Just certainty. You are in our system. A pause. You are not invited. The words settled into every ship. Into every mind. You have 60 seconds to reverse course. Another pause. There will not be a second warning. Silence followed. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of disbelief. The silence of realization. Cyrus stood still. His mind moving faster than any system around him. Running scenarios. Calculating outcomes. Evaluating options. Attack. 300 ships. Enough firepower to crack planets. His tactical system had already run the simulation. The result appeared on his display. Outcome, total fleet loss. Time to destruction. 4 seconds. Cyrus didn't question it. He didn't need to. He could see the truth in front of him. And yet, he didn't move. Because training and instinct were at war inside him. Retreat meant survival. But retreat also meant something else. Admitting that this thing, was beyond them. The countdown continued. 58 seconds. 59. 60. 61. Cyrus opened his mouth to give the order. Too late. The Leviathan fired. Not all of its weapons. Not even a fraction. Just one. A beam of golden white energy erupted from its forward array. Clean. Precise. Effortless. It passed between two Void Reapers. Missing both by less than a kilometer. And still, the heat alone melted sections of their hulls. Alarms screamed. Systems failed. Crew were thrown from their stations. The beam continued forward. 1 million kilometers. 2 million. Leaving behind a trail of superheated particles that glowed like a scar across space. Then, it stopped. Silence returned. But it was not the same silence. This time, it was fear. Because that had not been an attack. It had been a message. Cyrus found his voice. Barely. All ships. A pause. Full retreat. No hesitation this time. The fleet broke. Not in formation. Not in order. They turned and ran. Warp drives engaged too fast. Ships colliding with their own acceleration limits. Systems straining. Engines screaming. 300 warships fled like prey. And behind them, the Leviathan did not move. It didn't need to. Because it had already proven something the galaxy would never forget. Humanity had not asked to be seen. They had made it impossible to be ignored. The first signal spread faster than any fleet. Faster than any empire could contain. Faster than control. It began as fragments. Broken telemetry from retreating ships. Distorted sensor logs. Emergency recordings captured in panic. Then the full data leak hit the galactic networks. And everything changed. A single clip. Unstable. Shaking. Incomplete. It showed a section of space near a distant blue star. A formation of Thorisci warships holding position. Then, Something emerging from behind a gas giant. The scale was wrong. The lighting was wrong. Reality itself seemed to bend around it. The Leviathan. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Within an hour, it had been viewed billions of times. Within a day, every civilized system in the galaxy had seen it. The reaction was immediate. And it was not unified. Because for 12,000 years, the Thorisci Empire had defined reality. And now, reality had changed. Money bagged the opportunists. The Corvati Trade Federation moved first. They always did. To them, power was not something to fear. It was something to align with. Within hours of confirming the data, emergency sessions were called. Contracts drafted. Offers prepared. If this species has surpassed the Thorisci, one executive said, then they are the future. A delegation was assembled before the day ended. Ships loaded with gifts. Technology. Trade agreements. They didn't care how humanity had done it. They only cared that they had. And they intended to benefit from it. Fire the oppressed. The reaction on conquered worlds was very different. On Danari Prime, the footage played across every public channel. No censorship. No delay. For 3,000 years, the Danari had lived under Thorisci rule. Their military reduced. Their resources controlled. Their identity, suppressed. They had been told the Empire was invincible. Unbreakable. Eternal. Then they saw the Leviathan. They saw 300 Void Reapers retreat. Not strategically. Not tactically. But in fear. The streets filled within minutes. Crowds gathered. Voices rose. At first, disbelief. Then hope. Then something much more dangerous. Defiance. They can be beaten, someone said. And that was enough. Because once a population believes their oppressor is not invincible, control begins to fracture. Across dozens of worlds, the same realization spread. Quietly at first. Then louder. The Empire was not untouchable. And if it could bleed, it could fall. The Ancient Ones. The most unexpected reaction came from a species that had not spoken in over 1,000 years. The Ilway. They did not trade. They did not negotiate. They did not participate in galactic politics. They observed. Silently. For millennia. And then, they sent a message. It arrived on Earth without warning. Encrypted. Complex. Difficult to translate. When it was finally decoded, the message was short. Just a single line. We wondered when you would stop hiding. No fear. No surprise. Recognition. As if they had been waiting. Milky Way, the collapse begins. Back in the Thorisci Empire. Control was already slipping. The War Council had ordered a blackout. No information was to leave the system. No details were to be shared. The official report. Minor anomaly. Fleet returned for analysis. It lasted 6 hours. Then the leaks broke containment. Once the footage spread, there was no stopping it. Questions flooded every channel. Every network. Every government. What was the Leviathan? How did humans build it? Why had the Empire failed to stop it? And the most important question of all. What happens next? Scales hash on Earth. There were no celebrations. No public declarations of victory. No parades. No triumph. Because humanity understood something the rest of the galaxy did not. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Admiral Morrow stood in a secure chamber, surrounded by leaders from every nation on Earth. Military. Political. Scientific. All watching the same data. The same projections. The same inevitable conclusion. The Leviathan worked, Morrow said calmly. No pride. No satisfaction. Just fact. It did exactly what we designed it to do. A pause. It scared them. Silence filled the room. Then. But we need to understand something. Morrow looked around the table. Meeting every eye. We did not win. The words landed harder than anything else. We won a single encounter against a scouting force. He activated the display. Numbers filled the air. Fleet counts. Movement patterns. Deployment routes. The Thorisci Empire has 90,000 warships. Another shift. Another layer of data. We have won. No one spoke. Because the truth was unavoidable. The Leviathan was powerful. Yes. Unmatched. Yes. But it was still just one ship. And right now, Morrow continued, their entire empire is reacting to what happened. The display changed again. Red markers began to appear. One by one. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Fleet recall signals have already been issued, he said. Warships are being pulled from every sector. Patrol routes. Garrison systems. Occupied worlds. The red markers began moving. Converging. Aligning. Based on current movement patterns. A pause. We have approximately 3 weeks. Silence. Heavy. Cold. Before they arrive. No one needed to ask what they meant. Because everyone in that room understood. The Thorisci Empire was coming. And this time, they would not underestimate humanity. They came from every direction. Not as scattered patrols. Not as isolated fleets. But as something the galaxy had never seen before. A convergence. Across thousands of systems, recall orders were executed with ruthless precision. Warships abandoned posts. Garrisons were stripped. Occupied worlds were left under minimal control. Nothing mattered now except one objective. The red markers on Morrow's display multiplied by the hour. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. And still, they kept coming. 3 weeks passed faster than anyone expected. Because preparation does not slow time. It accelerates it. Inside the Leviathan, there was no panic. Only movement. The vast internal chambers, empty at first glance, came alive with purpose. Assembly lines stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Robotic arms moved in synchronized precision. Raw materials flowed through fabrication systems at impossible speeds. The Leviathan was no longer just a weapon. It was producing them. Status update, Morrow said. A holographic display expanded before him. First production cycle complete, the chief engineer reported. 4 Titan-class destroyers operational. 8 more at 70% completion. The projections shifted. Each Titan-class vessel, 800 kilometers long, hovered in formation around the Leviathan. Smaller than their parent. But still, larger than anything the Thorisci had ever built. Fighter production. Morrow asked. Valkyrie squadrons deploying in waves. Current count, 12,000. Increasing. And the carriers? 4 operational. Fully loaded. Morrow nodded once. Not enough. But it would have to be. Because nothing they built in 3 weeks could match what was coming. The final projections appeared. Thorisci Armada. 90,000 Void Reapers. 200,000 support vessels. Vassal fleets from 12 species. Total. Over 400,000 warships. Against? Human forces. 1 Leviathan. 12 Titan-class destroyers. 4 carrier groups. Orbital defense grid. The imbalance was overwhelming. 30,000 to 1. And yet, Morrow did not look concerned. Because numbers only mattered when both sides were playing the same game. They are adapting, one of the generals said. The display shifted again. New formations. New patterns. New weapon signatures. Cyrus has redesigned his entire strategy, the general continued. He's distributing null-field generators across the fleet. They're designed to disrupt energy systems at close range. Morrow studied the data. Smart, he said. Because it was. The Thorisci were not fools. They had underestimated humanity once. They would not do it again. They are preparing for a prolonged engagement, another officer added. They intend to overwhelm us through sustained pressure. Of course they did. That was how empires survived. Not through perfection. But through adaptation. Morrow turned away from the display. Then we don't give them one, he said. Milky Way the Armada arrives. They dropped out of warp at the edge of the solar system. And for a brief moment, they blocked out the stars. 400,000 ships. A wall of metal, weapons, and intent. It was not a fleet. It was an extinction event. On the bridge of his new flagship, Cyrus stood in silence. The fury of empires. A ship built specifically for this battle. He had spent every moment since the first encounter preparing. Studying. Analyzing. He had watched the Leviathan emerge. He had seen its power. He had felt its presence. And he had made a decision. He would not underestimate it again. This ends here, he said quietly. Not with arrogance. Not with certainty. But with resolve. Globe showing Europe, Africa. Humanity prepares. On the other side of the system. Humanity waited. The Leviathan stood at the center of the formation. Silent. Immovable. Around it, The Titan-class destroyers formed a defensive ring. Carrier groups positioned behind them. Fighters ready. Weapons charged. Earth itself had been transformed. Orbital platforms. Defense grids. Shield networks. The planet was no longer vulnerable. It was fortified. Morrow opened a channel. Not to the enemy. To his own people. Every ship. Every station. Every pilot. His voice carried across the system. Calm. Steady. 200 years ago. A pause. They came to our world and called us animals. No anger. No hatred. Just truth. They recorded us. Measured us. Filed us away. Silence followed. They looked at us and saw nothing. Morrow's gaze remained fixed ahead. Today, they brought 400,000 warships to our system. Another pause. That is not the action of a species that thinks we are nothing. A shift. A quiet wait. That is the action of a species that is afraid. The words settled into every listener. They should be. A final breath. Show them why. The channel closed. And across the battlefield, two forces prepared to collide. One built on 12,000 years of dominance. The other, on 150 years of silent determination. The distance between them closed. And then, the battle began. The first shots were not fired in anger. They were fired in certainty. The Thorisai Armada advanced as one. A massive spherical formation closing in from every direction, designed to overwhelm, surround, and crush. 400,000 warships moving with terrifying precision. Cyrus did not rush. He did not hesitate. Begin full assault. The command spread instantly. And space ignited. Plasma storms. Kinetic barrages. Missile swarms that turned the void into a storm of light and fire. Everything the Empire had. Unleashed at once. At the center of it all, the Leviathan did not move. Instead, the Titan-class destroyers shifted into position. 12 massive ships aligning around their origin point. Execute Aegis Protocol, Morrow ordered. Energy surged. Between the destroyers, beams of light connected, forming a vast, interlocking shield network. A wall. Golden. Radiant. Unbreakable. The first wave of Thorisai fire hit it. And stopped. The barrier rippled like water under impact. It flickered. It strained. But it held. Thousands of attacks. Millions. Absorbed. Cyrus watched the data. Analyzing. Adapting. Disperse formation, he ordered. Break into strike groups. Probe for weaknesses. The Armada shifted. Clusters of ships split off, hundreds at a time, striking at different points along the barrier. Searching. Testing. It was working. The shield began to fluctuate. Localized strain. Energy redistribution. Pressure point identified, a Thorisai officer reported. Concentrate fire. Thousands of ships converged. Focused. Relentless. On the human side. Warnings lit up across the Leviathan's command interface. Barrier integrity dropping in Sector 7. Energy saturation approaching critical levels. Morrow didn't react. Hold formation, he said. Because this was expected. Then, the humans fired back. Through the barrier. Aelio's lances erupted from the Leviathan and its escorts. Not scattered. Not random. Precise. Each beam carved through the Thorisai formation like a blade through paper. Dozens of ships, gone in a single sweep. Then hundreds. Then more. The first exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, over 3,000 Void Reapers had been destroyed. And still, the Armada advanced. Cyrus did not panic. Losses were expected. Sacrifice was part of strategy. Maintain pressure, he ordered. Find the fracture point. And they did. Sector 9. The combined assault of thousands of ships overloaded the shield grid. 2 Titan-class destroyers took the impact. The first. Its shields collapsed instantly. Plasma tore across its hull. Explosions ripped through its internal structure. Crew lost in seconds. And still, it fired. Until its reactor went critical. The explosion lit the battlefield like a second sun. The second destroyer lasted longer. 3 minutes. Its captain made a decision. Not to retreat. To charge. The dying ship accelerated directly into the densest concentration of enemy vessels. It tore through dozens before breaking apart. And when it detonated, it took hundreds with it. The battlefield shifted. Human losses. Real. Heavy. But the line held. In the chaos between capital ships, fighters clashed. Valkyrie squadrons moved with speed and precision, cutting through Thorisai interceptors. But for every one destroyed, more replaced it. The void filled with wreckage. With debris. With silence where voices had been. Morrow felt it. Every loss. Every life. But he did not stop. Because he knew. This was only the beginning. 2 hours into the battle. Thorisai losses, 15,000 ships. Human losses, 2 destroyers, 800 fighters, 30,000 personnel. The Aegis barrier flickered. Weakening. The remaining destroyers struggled to maintain it. If it fell, the armada would swarm the Leviathan. And even it could not survive that. Morrow made his decision. Execute withdrawal pattern Omega. Confusion spread across the fleet. But the order was followed instantly. Human ships began to pull back. The barrier opened. A gap formed. A wide corridor through the center of the defensive line. To the Thorisai, it looked like a mistake. A weakness. Cyrus saw it. Advance, he ordered. Thousands of ships surged forward. Into the opening. Into the heart of the formation. They believed they had broken through. They were wrong. The gap closed behind them. Not physically. Not yet. But strategically. Thousands of Thorisai warships surged into the corridor, engines burning, weapons charging, convinced they had found the weakness that would end the battle. For a brief, perfect moment, they believed they were winning. On the bridge of the Leviathan, Admiral Morrow watched them enter. His face was still. His hands steady. Confirm corridor saturation, he said. Target density optimal, came the reply. A pause. Range, perfect. Morrow nodded once. Seal the perimeter. Behind the advancing Thorisai fleet, human forces shifted. Destroyers repositioned. Carrier groups realigned. The corridor became a cage. Too late. Cyrus saw it. Understood it. And in that instant, he knew. Retreat. The word never finished. Because deep within the Leviathan, something ancient in concept, and impossible in execution, came online. Sun with rays hashed the stellar convergence array. For over a century, humanity had been preparing this moment. Not just building a ship. Not just designing weapons. But creating a system. A network hidden across the solar system. Relay satellites embedded in distant orbits. Silent. Invisible. Waiting. Now. They activated. Connections formed. Energy flowed. Not from reactors. Not from reserves. From the star itself. The sun. Solar output, captured, redirected, compressed through layered fields of impossible engineering, was funneled into a single point. The Leviathan. Warnings flooded every system. Energy intake exceeding safe thresholds. Containment fields at maximum capacity. Inside the ship, entire sections glowed with contained power. The structure itself groaned, not from weakness, but from scale. Because no ship had ever held this much energy. No weapon had ever demanded it. Morrow didn't move. Fire. The universe changed. A beam erupted from the bow of the Leviathan. Not like the Aelio's lance. Not precise. Not narrow. This was something else. A column of pure stellar energy. Miles wide. Brighter than the sun. It did not travel. It existed. And everything in its path stopped existing. The Thorisai ships inside the corridor never saw it. There was no warning. No time to react. No chance to escape. One moment. They were there. The next. They were gone. Vaporized. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Erased. The beam carved through the armada. Straight through its center. Millions of kilometers in length. A wound in space. And when it ended, silence followed. 3 seconds. That was all it took. 3 seconds to erase over 20,000 warships. 3 seconds to break the largest fleet ever assembled. 3 seconds. To end 12,000 years of certainty. On the bridge of the Thorisai flagship, Cyrus stood frozen. His tactical display updated in real time. A section of his fleet. Gone. Not retreating. Not scattered. Gone. For the first time in his life. He did not understand what he was seeing. Not strategically. Not scientifically. Emotionally. Because there were no tactics for this. No counter. No adaptation. This was not a battle anymore. It was a realization. And it hit harder than any weapon. Around him, the armada broke. Ships turned. Fled. Warp drives engaged without coordination. The vassal fleets ran first. Then the outer formations. Then everyone. Order collapsed. The greatest military force in galactic history disintegrated in minutes. Cyrus did not try to stop them. He knew. It was over. He opened a private channel. Encrypted. Direct. Admiral Morrow. The connection established. 2 commanders. 2 survivors. Facing each other across the void. Cyrus spoke first. How long? No anger. No pride. Just one question. How long have you been planning this? Morrow answered without hesitation. Since the day you called us animals. Silence. Cyrus closed his eyes briefly. Then. He inclined his head. A gesture of respect. Not for an enemy. For an equal. The channel closed. Moments later. The Thorisci flagship turned. And fled. Milky Way the fall. Empires do not collapse in a single moment. But they do break. And once broken, they cannot be put back together the same way. The news spread instantly. No blackout could stop it this time. The footage. The data. The truth. The empire had been defeated. Not slowly. Not gradually. Decisively. Within days. Rebellions began. Within weeks. Systems declared independence. Within a month. The Thorisci Empire fractured beyond repair. Not because humanity conquered it. But because it could no longer convince anyone it was unbeatable. Globe showing Europe Africa what comes after. On Earth. There was no celebration. Only silence. Reflection. And responsibility. Admiral Morrow stood before a unified council. Leaders from across the planet. We built the Leviathan to be seen, he said. A pause. Now we decide what that means. Because power was never the goal. Being ignored was. And now, that was no longer possible. Weeks later, a message was broadcast across the galaxy. Not a threat. Not a demand. An invitation. A new framework. A new beginning. No species would ever be labeled as less again. No civilization would be ignored. No voice would be dismissed. The Leviathan remained. But it changed. Its weapons were not removed. But they were no longer its purpose. Its construction bays began producing something different. Not warships. Aid. Infrastructure. Hope. And across the galaxy, a new era began. Not perfect. Not peaceful. But different. On a distant world once ruled by the Thorisci, a child looked up at the sky as the Leviathan passed overhead. Not in fear. In wonder. It's beautiful, she said. And for the first time in a very long time. That was enough.